So the oceans play a vital and key role in the whole system of the planet, and they're changing in ways that are detrimental now, and that are going to make climate change much worse as we move forward into the future.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Climate Emergency Forum. But today we have a special edition for you in alignment with the United Nations World Oceans Month. Our show today is an SOS, Save Our Seas. And so we're going to talk to you about what I would like to refer to as the moral imperative of saving our seas. And I'm going to start us off on what I think is one of the great questions of our time. What is a man worth, or what is a living being worth? Is a living being worth, or are millions of living beings worth having a greener lawn than your neighbor? Well, there are a lot of issues that come into play, and you may not understand why I'm bringing up your lawn, your beautiful suburban lawn. But I have to start with some really startling and sad news today. And that is something that I read yesterday, actually, that as of the beginning of this year, more than 10% of Florida's manatee population has died since the beginning of the year. And for those of you who actually don't know the literal meaning of decimated, decimated starts with the word deci, meaning 10. So we have decimated the manatee population since the beginning of the year. And if that doesn't set off an alarm of SOS, I don't know what will. And why is this important? Why is this important is that we are mammals, right? And we prize that. We are sentient beings. We have emotions. We have feelings. We connect with other of our species. But we're not the only species that has this same lived experience. This is a very common experience among mammalian species, of which we are a part. Water quality in our oceans has worsened greatly. A lot of this is due to runoff from fertilizers, and also sewage and septic leaks. What a terrible, terrible thing that we're doing to our beautiful, beautiful oceans. So what we're doing by this is we're increasing algal blooms, algae. Pardon that motorcycle. That's part of the problem right there. It's an environmental stressor, and it not only affects us, it affects other living beings. The stressors of the environment, noise, water runoff, sewage and septic leaks, affects the actual size of living beings. This has been proven that other species are shrinking in size, and scientists attribute that to noise as a big part of that. So I just want to continue that when we have the increase of these fertilizers, such as nitrogen and phosphorus, this increases algae within our oceans. And what do these algae need? They need oxygen. And with the decreasing oxygen in our ocean, well, this kills living beings that need oxygen to survive. Maybe you've heard of the red tides. I grew up in Texas, and so my association with the ocean or with bodies of water was Galveston. And many times as a child, we'd go to Galveston and we wouldn't be able to swim. Why? Well, it was the red tide. And all I knew about the red tide is when the red tide is in, all the fish in the ocean are out on the shore, thousands and thousands as far as the eye can see. And it makes we can't hang out on the beach because there's dead living beings everywhere, and you certainly don't want to swim in it. It's not clean and it's not safe. There are 63,000 manatees in Florida. How many do you think are going to be left within the next 5 or 6 years? Does it even matter? Who cares? I contend that it matters greatly. It matters greatly. And it is a moral and spiritual issue, and not just ecological. So I'm going to bring up another issue of who cares, and that is whales. You know that there are 360 North Atlantic right whales that are alive today. 360. Now, these whales are called right whales because when the whalers would go out to sea, they would be like, oh, that's the right whale. Well, that meant that that was the whale to kill. And we would use it for its blubber. We would use the oil. And this helped us, this helped America, this helped all North Americans and Europeans as well to modernize to this world that we're in today. Well, I don't know. We can say that this is for better or for worse. But one thing that I will tell you is that off of their backs we have grown, and their backs show the scars of fishing gear, of ships running into them. And they are actually 3 feet smaller than they were in 1981. Who cares? Well, being smaller means that they have less nutritional resources on board to be able to withstand the lean years of food and what happens with climate change. So Peter, I've dumped a lot out there right in the very beginning, and I'm wondering if you have something that you would, maybe that sparks some thoughts or maybe something else entirely.
Well, you presented some of the key present information, Regina, which, as you say, we all should be aware of. And I'm struck by the fact you mentioned we need to care. So it occurs to me, yeah, but in order to care, we have to feel pretty sad. We have to feel at least some of the suffering in our hearts. And then I think that would lead to caring, because clearly everybody is talking about caring, but clearly we're not. I'm going to start with a very, very short section of a long poem by Lord Byron, who was writing at the end of the 1700s or something like that. This is an epic poem called The Oceans. Here it is, just a little tiny bit. Roll on, thou deep and dark blue ocean, roll. 10,000 fleets sweep over thee in vain. Man marks the earth with ruin. His control stops with the shore. And of course, when I first read that a long time ago, I was struck by the fact, yeah, that's changed. Well, certainly today we could add a line which would say, alas, today, this is no more. In 1996, I read the book and then subsequently saw the Canadian documentary by Farley Mort, a Canadian maritime author. The book was called Sea of Slaughter. At the time, I was one of those vegetarians who thought that you were vegetarian, but you could eat fish and seafood and stuff like that. After the book, I had to think about that seriously. After I saw the documentary film, I said to my friends, oh my God, I have to quit eating fish now. And I still am, and I feel okay about that. And I take my omega-3 from plants and all that good stuff. So here's the situation that I discovered. The World Bank put out a report in 2017 in which it said almost 90% of the global marine fish stocks are now fully exploited or overfished. And wild capture fisheries are struggling without sound regulatory frameworks or enforcement. The demand for fish is now twice the estimated supply of sustainably caught wild fish. We're strip mining the seas, we're plundering the oceans. Some years ago, we discovered that 90% of all the big fish were practically fished out. So I guess the sort of question is, how do you care about a fish, right? How do you learn to love fish? On to the World Wildlife Fund, who put out a report. I can remember years ago when I was horrified that bycatch was running at about 15% of the world fisheries catch. Well, apparently now it's 40%. So here's some pretty sad statistics. Every year, 300,000 small whales and dolphins are killed by bycatch. These are caught up in the nets, but the fisheries seems to not want them, and they get thrown out, and they're just treated as trash. But they're all special living beings because they are our very distant ancestors. And as Regina says, we're all in the family of mammals. We're all related. 250,000 endangered loggerhead turtles and critically endangered leatherback turtles get thrown out in the bycatch. 300,000 seabirds, including 17 species of albatross. And of course, that great bird, the albatross, amazing long distance flyer for feeding, the female for feeding her chicks, they're in big trouble because of this. In total, 38 million tons of sea creatures are unintentionally caught, and that's 40% of fish. Next thing I found at WWF is what is called ghost gear. So the so-called world fishing fleet now is absolutely enormous, not only enormous in size, but enormous in size of vessels, because this is a vast industrial project now. And so tons, more than tons of fishing gear is deposited in the oceans every year, nets, lines, metals, all kinds of stuff. And it's estimated up to 1 million tons of fishing gear that are added to the litter of the oceans every year. And of course, they're snagging fish, snarling fish, strangling fish, as long as it's called a trap that never ends, because of course this is indestructible plastic gear and stuff. And so my last sad data for you, of course, is, and I think this is better known, which is good, which is bottom trawling. So this industry churns up 22 billion tons of seabed every year. So we're not only strip mining and fishing out the oceans, we're plowing up the oceans, and obviously the seabed is a crucial ecosystem for all of life in the seas. So at least we know about this, and that's good. So maybe we'll learn to care and suffer a little bit with our poor fish brethren and decide to stop it all. We can at least eat less fish. And I'm encouraged to hear that there is cell culture fish. Maybe that's the answer.
Thank you so much, Peter. Those are some really, really powerful and sobering, I hate to even say statistics, facts. You just even want to allow a moment of silence to let that sink in. It's incredibly overwhelming. So I'll pass it over to Paul.
Yes, hello everybody. If you've been following our group, the Climate Emergency Forum, for a while, you'll recall that we did a video a few months ago called Oceans in Crisis, and we talked about 3 of the main tipping points of the ocean, and those are, of course, the incredibly fast warming of the oceans, the acidification of the oceans, and deoxygenation of the oceans. So, you know, as most of you probably realize, you know, the crisis in the oceans is often talked about as climate change's evil twin, if you like. And it doesn't get discussed enough because we're all, you know, living on the land, and, you know, we tend to forget about the ocean. And the ocean, of course, is vital for the entire stability of the overall climate system. And it's also hopeful that there's some possible climate change solutions that we can use via the the ocean. So, of course, you know, the loss of biodiversity, both on land and in the ocean, is ongoing, and it's an enormous problem. When the biosystems have diversity, the diversity gives them resilience. And as we lose members, species, different species, then the other species become much less resilient, and there's increased risks of the whole system collapsing. It just does not have the resilience that it has with large biodiversity. And of course, you know, we know about the plastics in the ocean, and the problem with the plastics is they remain for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they're broken down by wave action and being beaten on beaches and things, on rocks. They're abraded and broken down into smaller and smaller particles. And of course, as those plastic particles get smaller and smaller, they're often mistaken as food, and they're ingested into the food chain, and they don't go away once they're in the stomachs of animals, and they can be transported up the food chain when those animals are ingested by animals higher up in the food chain. And we're concerned, you know, we have some ideas to remove the floating plastics, but it's estimated, you know, most of the plastics eventually over time end up sinking to the seafloor. At least over half of them do, and then they get into the sediments, and you know, they're kind of they're not considered. We have no way of removing them. They become deeper and deeper into embedded in the sediments, and degrade over long periods of time. But you know, we just consider that all plastics float, and that's actually not the case. Now, Peter has mentioned the fishing, and you know, the technology improvements or advances in fishing allows far fewer fishing boats and trawlers to catch far greater amounts of fish. And of course, as the numbers of fish get reduced in the oceans, these boats and fleets, fishing fleets, have to travel much further and go much deeper. And you know, they fish out one species and they move on to another species. And you know, essentially, there's no species that are left untouched. And they don't just extract the fish. There's all kinds of bycatch, so-called bycatch, and there's all kinds of fishing gear that is lost in the ocean, tons of it. And the bottom scouring, you know, some of these fishing trawlers have lines that spread out for many, many kilometers, many, many miles behind the boats, and they scour the bottom. So not only do they remove the fish from the ocean, but they negatively affect the flora and fauna on the seafloor. Of course, coral reefs are in grave jeopardy, and as the oceans continue to warm, we will lose many coral reefs. And about 25% of fish in the ocean spend at least part of their life cycle on the reefs, using the reefs as protection, for spawning, and you know, also as food supply. So also, the males of many species are becoming less fertile. With the rising water temperatures, there's a lot more infertility in species, and that reduces the numbers. And you know, something that's not occurring much now, but will in the future, as it becomes harder and harder to extract iron, you know, ores to get minerals for our industrial civilizations, we're turning to deep sea mining. You know, as price goes up with these minerals, it becomes, there's more and more work being done to see what can we mine. And of course, imagine what that will then add to the stresses on the ocean. And finally, the last point is that the oceans, the circulation systems that carry heat from the equator to the poles is being rewired as we lose Arctic sea ice. And when we completely lose the Arctic sea ice, then not only the jet streams change, which gives us all the extreme weather on land, but also the ocean current systems change, And that, of course, has tremendous implications for life in the ocean. And we're experiencing, just one example of that is the droughts in the US. I mean, the droughts are getting worse and worse, and it's because of this rewiring of the ocean and atmosphere circulation patterns.
Well, you certainly brought up a lot. And I don't even know what to touch on, because the whole idea of materials being left in the ocean in someone else's home, right? So imagine someone came and plundered your home and took everything that was necessary for your survival out of it, and just left a ton of junk that was going to be harmful to you in your home, where it would be harmful for you to live in your home. And that's exactly what we're doing. So both of you spoke to the issue of bycatch, and I have to say personally, I understand the term and I get it, but I find it so appalling, right? It is, as you said, Peter, they're summarily thrown out like trash. I mean, even the term is just so offensive. One of the things that I've heard a lot from Homo sapiens is that other animals don't matter so much as a human animal, because we're top of the food chain. We're smarter. We I don't know, I guess we're smarter. We offer more destruction, I would say. But this is not necessarily so. This is how we view ourselves, because we look at ourselves so much, but we don't look at others. And what's incredible is to see the intelligence of other living beings. And in fact, whales and dolphins have these specialized brain cells, spindle neurons, and these are associated with their abilities to communicate, to perceive, to have empathy. And a matter of fact, they're able to process emotions perhaps even more than we are, and we're not even aware of that. So to know that these living beings do care and love for their own, and then to refer to them as bycatch seems something unholy in a way, doesn't it? Yeah, so Peter.
Why do we study all these things which Paul tells us about in such detail, and Regina tells us about so eloquently? Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing it, of course, to alert people that we're in a climate emergency, but we're in a climate and oceans emergency. So I've been trying to use this term for some years now. This amounts to the fact that we're in Earth emergency. So one of the things I try and communicate is the results of the United Nations IPCC, the Governmental Panel on Climate Change. And in 2019, they issued what they called a special report. It was on the oceans and cryosphere. So at the time, I extracted what I thought was the most important part of the oceans report. And it was really, really startling. The media covered it, and they said UN panel signals red alert on blue planet. Climate change is devastating our seas and frozen regions as never before, the major UN report warns. And these impacts have been happening at a warming of 1 degree C. So from the report, a little introduction, the projected responses of the ocean to past and current human-induced greenhouse gas emissions, our continued emissions, and ongoing global warming includes changes over decades to millennia, to thousands of years, that cannot be avoided, including thresholds of abrupt change and irreversibility. Now, I've been working with the IPCC for a number of years now, and believe me, that's very, very strong language coming from the IPCC. A few examples: ocean heat since 1993, the rate of ocean heat uptake has doubled. It's accelerating. The deep ocean, below 2,000 meters, the deep ocean, that's warmed. The scientists are able to say that the warming, the heating from our emissions is spreading right down to the bottom of the ocean. This wasn't in the IPCC report, but the scientists tell us that this heat that's being added to the oceans amounts to 10 Hiroshima atom bombs being exploded every second. And that's madness, absolute madness. Marine heat waves, we now have frequent marine heat waves. And since 1982 to 2006, they have doubled in frequency. They have become longer lasting, more intense, and more extensive. Then there's a thing that the scientists call stratification. And this is reduced natural vertical exchange of the upper and lower ocean water, which is absolutely fundamental and essential to provide food for all the marine creatures, but also to keep the oceans clean and functioning. This stratification has increased since 1970. And this is already inhibiting. We're recording that it's slowing the mixing between the surface and the upper oceans. As a result of ocean heat, we have ocean deoxygenation. That's different from the estuary and coastal deoxygenation, which Regina explained so well. No, this is ocean deoxygenation in the open, deep oceans. And the ocean is progressively losing oxygen. The vast ocean, and that reduction of oceans can be measured, imagine, and it's up to 3%. And that's alongside the expansion of now massive, what are called dead zones in the deep ocean. And they're expanding. And it's the oxygen loss, which is coming from the ocean stratification. So what can be worse than acidifying and removing the oxygen from the oceans? It's unbelievable. We have to stop it. We have to force our governments to stop it, is what we have to do. By the way, the governments are still subsidizing the fishing industry, despite the fact that the WTO, no less, has been asking governments for at least 10 years not to. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. I just want to say to those of you watching out there, as I mentioned at the top of the show, it is World Ocean Month. And you may be saying to yourself, this is a downer of a forum today. But I would like to submit to you that with all that we're doing to the oceans, the least we could do is feel a little bit sad about it. And as Dr. Carter says, perhaps feeling sad may prompt us to actually do something. So Paul, your thoughts?
Yes. So when we often use the phrase global warming, it used to be exclusively used, but now, people say climate change or abrupt climate change because some regions of the world, very few of them, but there are some where they're actually not getting huge amounts of warming. For example, one patch of ocean south of Greenland is often called a global warming hole because it's actually been cooling in that region due to the slowing down of the Gulf Stream and the whole AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation pattern. But the warming itself of the globe is 93% or more of that warming is actually warming of the oceans. It's warming of the oceans and the lakes and the rivers. It's warming of the water bodies on the surface of the planet. So warming of the atmosphere and the soils and the rocks and the cities, the concrete in cities, is only 7% of the total planetary warming. So, and it's almost what we exclusively focus on, but the vast bulk, the 93%, is in the oceans. And of course, sea level rise is one of the biggest manifestations of the warming oceans, because when you add heat to something, it expands. And water in the ocean basins expanding is overflowing the basins and causing, the biggest cause of sea level rise up to now. So think of what's happening to the coastlines around the planet. And also a report just came out a few days ago talking about wave heights in general are higher than they were before. So combine rising seas overrunning coastlines with more intense, more energetic wave action. And you can imagine the increased level of erosion that occurs on coastlines. And you can also know, of course, that as the oceans are rising, the salt water is getting onto very fertile lowlands on coasts, and that's threatening the food being the agriculture in those regions. So those are all connected to the changes in the ocean. You know, Peter mentioned the stratification of the ocean. So the vertical mixing is decreasing, and because of the higher water temperatures, there's less carbon dioxide and oxygen that is able to be dissolved in the water. And because there's less water coming up and less water going deeper, there's less oxygen being carried from the surface and CO2 being carried from the surface to deeper levels. So this is the deoxygenation Peter's mentioned, but also there's less CO2 going down. So there's less, the carbon sink of the oceans is decreasing. So the oceans play a vital and key role in the whole system of the planet, and they're changing in ways that are detrimental now, and that are going to, make climate change much worse, as we move forward into the future.
Well, there you have it, folks. I don't know what else to add. Peter and Paul, you brought up some amazing, extraordinary facts today. And I really have to say, Paul, I never knew that the heating, when we speak about global warming, that it was really comprised of what's happening within the oceans, and that the land was only 7%. So that's a real eye-opener for me, and thank you for sharing that. And I want to thank every one of you who has stayed throughout the entirety of this discussion. I know it wasn't easy, but it's important. So for those of you who are still here, I offer you a great hearty thanks. And for those of you who maybe have missed our prior discussion on the oceans, check it out. It's going to be linked in the description below. Also, make sure that you subscribe, because the more subscribers we have, the more people get to see our videos. And hit that bell as well. You hit that bell icon, and each time we come out with a new video, you will be apprised. You'll be able to be one of the first to watch it. So please do that. And if you're interested in what other things you can do as an individual, as a family, to help our oceans, we're going to link some ideas here below. And as Dr. Carter said, something as simple as not eating fish. And by the way, I wouldn't encourage you to eat fish too much anyway, because a lot of it is polluted and probably not so good for you, and certainly not as good as you're being told. So we're going to watch out for your health and that of the planet and every living being on it. And for all of us here at the Climate Emergency Forum, thank you all, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. See you next time.